She spent her husband's entire fortune on her lover, believing she had everything under control. But on the day of the will reading, as the lawyer began to speak, a chilling shiver ran down her spine. The sleek black Bentley glided through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Inside, Gabriel Montenegro sat in contemplative silence, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the city lights reflecting off the glass and steel skyscrapers that lined Michigan Avenue. The rhythmic tap of raindrops on the roof provided a somber backdrop to his thoughts. As the car approached the towering Montenegro Plaza, Gabriel's gaze drifted to the imposing structure that bore his name. The 60-story behemoth of glass and chrome stood as a testament to his success, a monument to the empire he had built from nothing. At 45, Gabriel Montenegro was at the pinnacle of his career, a self-made billionaire whose name was synonymous with power and innovation in the Windy City. The Bentley pulled up to the private entrance, and before the chauffeur could open the door, Gabriel was already stepping out into the misty Chicago night. He moved with purpose, his tailored Armani suit barely creasing as he strode into the lobby. The security guard nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Montenegro." Gabriel acknowledged him with a slight nod, his mind already racing with the challenges that awaited him upstairs. As he entered his private elevator, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished doors. The face that stared back at him was handsome, with strong features etched by years of determination and hard work. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, not a strand out of place despite the damp weather outside. The elevator ascended swiftly to the top floor, and as the doors opened, Gabriel was greeted by the familiar sight of his executive suite. The spacious office was a blend of modern design and old-world charm, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline. He moved to his desk, a massive slab of Italian marble, and sank into his leather chair. For a moment, Gabriel allowed himself to relax, his eyes drawn to the family photo on his desk. It was a picture of him and his wife, Margaret, taken at their Cayman Islands villa last summer. Margaret's radiant smile beamed back at him, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders, blue eyes sparkling with what appeared to be pure joy. They looked like the perfect couple, the embodiment of success and happiness. Gabriel's fingers traced the edge of the frame, a faint smile playing on his lips as he remembered that day. It had been one of the rare moments when he had managed to tear himself away from work, to focus solely on his wife and their life together. Margaret had been so vibrant, so full of life. It was moments like these that reminded him why he worked so hard, why he pushed himself to the limits of his endurance day after day. But as quickly as the warm memory came, it faded, replaced by a nagging sense of unease that had been growing in recent months. Something had changed in their relationship, a subtle shift that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Margaret's smiles seemed a little less genuine, her kisses a little less passionate. At first he had dismissed it as a product of his overactive imagination, a result of the stress and long hours he'd been putting in at the office. But lately the feeling had become impossible to ignore. Shaking off the unsettling thoughts, Gabriel turned his attention to the stack of documents on his desk. The latest financial reports from his various enterprises lay before him, demanding his scrutiny. As he began to pore over the numbers, his brow furrowed. Something wasn't adding up. The discrepancies were subtle, easily overlooked by less experienced eyes, but to Gabriel, they stood out like red flags. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the speed dial for his CFO. It was late, well past midnight, but this couldn't wait. Just as he was about to make the call, his personal cell phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret. "Don't wait up, darling. Girls' night running late. See you in the morning, XO." Gabriel stared at the message, a mix of emotions washing over him. Relief that he wouldn't have to explain another late night at the office, but also a twinge of something else. Suspicion? Doubt? He pushed the feeling aside, chiding himself for being paranoid. Margaret had always been social, and her charity work often kept her out late. It was one of the things he loved about her, her dedication to giving back to the community. Returning his attention to the financial discrepancies, Gabriel immersed himself in his work, losing track of time as he dug deeper into the numbers. It was nearly 3 a.m. when he finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He had uncovered a pattern, a series of unexplained withdrawals and transfers that had been carefully hidden within the complex web of his financial empire. The amounts were significant, totaling in the millions, yet they had been siphoned off so skillfully that they had escaped notice until now. Gabriel's mind raced with possibilities. Was it embezzlement, a sophisticated hacking scheme, or something even more sinister? He knew he had made enemies over the years. Success always breeds jealousy and resentment, but this felt different, more personal somehow. As he contemplated his next move, Gabriel's gaze fell once again on the photo of Margaret. For a split second, an unthinkable thought flashed through his mind, but he dismissed it immediately. Margaret was many things, but she would never betray him like that. Their love, their life together, was the foundation upon which he had built everything. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, Gabriel began to formulate a plan. He would need to be careful, methodical. If someone was trying to undermine him, he couldn't risk tipping them off. He would have to conduct his investigation in secret. Trust no one until he had all the facts. Just as he was about to shut down his computer and head home, an email notification popped up on his screen. The sender was unknown, the subject line blank. Against his better judgment, Gabriel clicked to open it. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was a photo, clearly taken earlier that night. In it, he could see Margaret, her blonde hair unmistakable, entering an upscale hotel. But she wasn't alone. A man, tall and dark-haired, had his arm around her waist, guiding her through the revolving door. The man's face was turned away from the camera, but the intimacy of the gesture was undeniable. Gabriel felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He stared at the image, willing it to be some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding, but deep down he knew. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. With trembling hands, he reached for his phone again, this time pulling up his banking app. He navigated to the joint accounts he shared with Margaret, accounts he rarely checked personally. What he saw there confirmed his worst fears. Massive withdrawals, extravagant purchases, transfers to unknown accounts, all bearing Margaret's digital signature. The reality of the situation hit Gabriel like a physical blow. The woman he loved, the partner he had trusted implicitly, had been systematically draining their accounts. And for what? For whom? The man in the photo. How long had this been going on? As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the Chicago skyline, Gabriel Montenegro sat in his office, his world crumbling around him. The empire he had built, the life he had crafted so carefully, suddenly felt hollow. He had always prided himself on his business acumen, his ability to read people and situations. How could he have been so blind to what was happening in his own home? The buzzing of his phone startled him out of his shocked reverie. It was a text from Margaret. "On my way home, darling. Breakfast together." Gabriel stared at the message, his mind reeling. In that moment he made a decision. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. If Margaret was capable of this level of deception, who knew what else she might do if cornered? No, he needed to be smart about this. He needed to gather more information, to understand the full extent of her betrayal. As he stood to leave his office, Gabriel caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him seemed older, wearier than the one who had entered the building just hours ago, but there was something else there too, a hardness in his eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of determination. Gabriel Montenegro had built his empire from nothing once before. If necessary, he would do it again. But this time, he would make sure that those who had betrayed him paid dearly for their actions. As he stepped into the elevator, a plan was already forming in his mind. Margaret, her mysterious lover, whoever else was involved. They had no idea what they had set in motion. The elevator doors closed, and as Gabriel descended to the lobby, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And when he did, there would be a reckoning unlike anything Chicago had ever seen. Little did Gabriel know as he stepped out into the early morning light of the city he had conquered, that his journey for truth and vengeance was about to take him down a path darker and more treacherous than he could have ever imagined. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than he knew. Across town, in a luxurious suite at the Peninsula Chicago, Margaret Montenegro stirred from her slumber. She reached for her phone, checking the message she had sent to Gabriel. No response. A small frown creased her flawless features as she turned to the man sleeping beside her. "Hunter," she whispered, running her fingers through his dark hair. "Wake up. We need to talk." The man opened his eyes, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "What's wrong, beautiful? Having second thoughts? Margaret shook her head, her expression hardening. No, but I think we need to move faster. Gabriel's not stupid. We can't risk him figuring things out before we're ready. Hunter sat up, pulling Margaret close. Don't worry, baby. Everything's going according to plan. Soon we'll have it all, and Gabriel Montenegro will be nothing but a distant memory. As the sun rose over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city's iconic skyline, the stage was set for a battle of wits, wealth, and will. Gabriel Montenegro, the self-made billionaire, was about to face the fight of his life, and unbeknownst to him, the enemies he faced were far closer to home than he could have ever imagined. The wheels of fate had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. In the world of high finance and even higher stakes, only one thing was certain. When the dust settled, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Montenegro penthouse as Margaret stirred her coffee, lost in thought. From her vantage point on the balcony, she had a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, its waters shimmering like a blanket of diamonds in the early light. It was a view that had once filled her with awe and gratitude. Now it only served as a gilded cage, a constant reminder of the life she had grown to resent. Margaret's phone buzzed softly on the glass table beside her. A text from Hunter. Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again. A small smile played on her lips as she quickly typed a response, her heart racing with the thrill of their secret affair. Hunter was everything Gabriel wasn't. Young, exciting, passionate. Where Gabriel was all business and sharp edges, Hunter was smooth charm and adventure. He made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. As she set her phone down, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the balcony's glass doors. At 38, she was still strikingly beautiful, her golden hair and piercing blue eyes turning heads wherever she went. But lately, she had begun to see the first signs of age creeping in. A fine line here, a hint of fatigue there. It terrified her, the thought of growing old, of losing the beauty that had always been her greatest asset. The sound of footsteps pulled Margaret from her reverie. Gabriel emerged onto the balcony, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. He placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Good morning, darling," he said, his voice distracted. "I'm afraid I'll have to miss breakfast again. There's a situation at the office that needs my immediate attention." Margaret fought to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Of course, Gabriel. When isn't there a situation at the office?" If Gabriel noticed the edge in her tone, he didn't show it. He was already scrolling through his phone, no doubt reviewing the day's agenda. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. How about dinner at Alinea this weekend? We can celebrate the Anderson deal." "The Anderson deal?" Margaret raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. Gabriel's eyes lit up, the way they always did when he talked business. "Yes, it's a game changer for us. If we can pull it off, it'll open up entirely new markets in Asia. It's been keeping me busy, but the potential is enormous." Margaret nodded, her mind already drifting. She had long ago stopped trying to keep up with Gabriel's endless stream of deals and acquisitions. Once, she had been his confidant, his partner in every sense of the word. Now she felt like little more than a trophy, a beautiful accessory to be trotted out at galas and charity events. "That sounds wonderful, dear," she said, plastering on a smile. "I'm sure it will be a great success." Gabriel checked his watch and frowned. "I've got to run. I'll call you later." With another quick peck on the cheek, he was gone, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and the sprawling city below. As soon as she heard the elevator doors close, Margaret reached for her phone again. Her fingers flew across the screen as she typed a message to Hunter. "Lunch at the usual place, I need to see you." Across town, in a sleek high-rise overlooking Millennium Park, Hunter Davis lounged in his luxurious apartment, a satisfied smirk on his face as he read Margaret's message. At 32, Hunter was the very picture of success. Dashingly handsome, with a charm that could disarm even the most skeptical of marks. And Margaret Montenegro was his greatest mark yet. Hunter had first met Margaret at a charity gala 6 months ago. He had been there scouting for potential targets, wealthy women who might be susceptible to his particular brand of seduction. In Margaret, he had struck gold. It hadn't taken long for him to recognize the signs of a woman starved for attention, desperate for excitement in a life that had become predictable and unfulfilling. What had started as a carefully orchestrated seduction had quickly grown into something more. Hunter found himself genuinely drawn to Margaret's wit and passion, to the fire that Gabriel Montenegro had allowed to dim. Of course, the fact that she had access to one of the largest fortunes in Chicago didn't hurt either. As Hunter prepared for his lunch date with Margaret, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of something. Guilt, perhaps. He pushed the feeling aside. In his line of work, there was no room for sentiment. Margaret was a means to an end, a key to the kind of wealth and power he had always dreamed of, and if he had to break her heart to get it, well, that was just business. Meanwhile, in the steel and glass tower of Montenegro Plaza, Gabriel sat in his office, surrounded by a team of his top executives. The atmosphere was tense, the faces around the table grave as they pored over the latest financial reports. "As you can see, Mr. Montenegro," his CFO David Chen was saying, "the discrepancies we've uncovered are significant. We're looking at losses in the tens of millions over the past 6 months alone." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had suspected that something was amiss, but the scale of the problem was far greater than he had imagined. "And we're certain this isn't just an accounting error?" David shook his head. "I'm afraid not, sir. We've gone over the numbers multiple times. This appears to be a deliberate and sophisticated attempt to siphon funds from the company." The room fell silent as the implications of David's words sank in. Gabriel's eyes scanned the faces of his team, searching for any sign of deceit or complicity. These were people he had trusted for years, individuals who had been with him as he built his empire from the ground up. Could one of them be behind this? "All right," Gabriel said, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. "I want a full audit of every department, every project, every account. No stone left unturned. And this stays between us for now. I don't want to create panic until we know exactly what we're dealing with." As the team filed out of the room, Gabriel called out to his assistant Sarah, "Cancel my dinner plans for tonight and get me everything you can find on our employees' financial situations. Bank records, investment portfolios, recent large purchases. Anything that might raise a red flag." Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. Is there anything else I can do?" Gabriel paused, considering. Sarah had been with him for over a decade, one of the few people he felt he could truly rely on. "Yes," he said finally, "I need you to discreetly monitor Margaret's spending, personal accounts, credit cards, everything. And Sarah, this is strictly confidential. No one can know about this, not even Margaret." If Sarah was surprised by the request, she didn't show it. "Understood, sir. I'll have the information for you as soon as possible." As Sarah left the office, Gabriel turned to the window, his reflection superimposed over the Chicago skyline. The empire he had built was under threat, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger storm. Across the city, in a quiet corner of the exclusive Chicago Cut Steakhouse, Margaret and Hunter sat close together, their conversation hushed and intimate. Margaret's eyes sparkled as Hunter regaled her with tales of his latest adventures, skydiving in Dubai, racing exotic cars in Monaco. It was a world so far removed from her carefully controlled life with Gabriel, and she drank in every word. "You should have been there, Maggie," Hunter was saying, his hand resting casually on hers. "The adrenaline rush is like nothing you've ever experienced. It makes you feel alive." Margaret sighed, a wistful smile on her face. "It sounds incredible, Hunter. I wish I could experience something like that." Hunter leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Why can't you? We could go together. I know a place in the Caribbean, totally private. Just imagine it, you and me, the open ocean, no one to answer to but ourselves." For a moment, Margaret allowed herself to be swept away by the fantasy, but reality quickly reasserted itself. "You know I can't, Hunter. Gabriel would never allow it. He barely lets me out of his sight as it is." A flash of something, frustration, anger, passed across Hunter's face, but it was gone so quickly Margaret wasn't sure she had seen it at all. "Maggie, when are you going to start living for yourself? You're not Gabriel's property. You deserve to be happy, to be free." Margaret looked down at her plate, conflict written across her features. "It's not that simple, Hunter. Gabriel has given me everything. I can't just throw that away." Hunter's voice softened, taking on a persuasive tone that he knew Margaret couldn't resist. "I'm not asking you to throw anything away, beautiful. I'm asking you to take what's rightfully yours. Gabriel's fortune? You've earned every penny of it, standing by him all these years, playing the perfect wife. Don't you think it's time you enjoyed it?" Margaret's resolve began to waver. Hunter's words touched on desires she had long suppressed, the yearning for freedom, for excitement, for a life that was truly her own. And hadn't she earned it? Hadn't she sacrificed her own dreams, her own identity to be Mrs. Gabriel Montenegro? "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hunter's eyes gleamed with triumph. He had her. "I'm suggesting we take control of our own destiny, Maggie. Gabriel's not the only one who knows how to move money around. With your access and my expertise, we could set ourselves up for life. No more answering to anyone. Just you and me, living the life we deserve." As Hunter laid out his plan, Margaret felt a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. What he was proposing was more than just an affair. It was a complete upheaval of her life, a betrayal of everything she had known for the past 2 decades. But as she looked into Hunter's eyes, she saw a future filled with passion and adventure, a life where she was more than just an accessory to someone else's success. "Okay," she said finally, her decision made. "Tell me what I need to do." As Margaret and Hunter plotted their future, oblivious to the world around them, they failed to notice a woman sitting at the bar, her attention seemingly focused on her phone. Sarah, Gabriel's loyal assistant, discreetly snapped a photo of the couple, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what this would do to her boss. Back at Montenegro Plaza, Gabriel was in the middle of a tense conference call with his legal team when Sarah entered the office, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly. "Mr. Montenegro," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress, "I have that information you requested. I think you need to see this immediately." Gabriel excused himself from the call and took the tablet Sarah offered him. As he swiped through the photos and financial records, his expression hardened, the last vestiges of doubt evaporating. The woman he had loved, the partner he had trusted with everything, was systematically dismantling the life they had built together. "Sarah," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "I need you to set up a meeting with Jack Reardon. Tell him it's urgent." Sarah nodded, recognizing the name of Chicago's most ruthless private investigator. "Of course, Mr. Montenegro. Is there anything else?" Gabriel's eyes were cold as he looked up from the tablet. "Yes. Cancel all my appointments for the next week. It seems I have some personal matters to attend to." As Sarah left the office, Gabriel turned to the window, his reflection now barely visible in the fading light of day. The man staring back at him was not the confident, successful businessman of that morning. This was a man on the brink, a man who had just had his world shattered. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. A cold, calculating anger began to burn in Gabriel's chest. He had built his empire from nothing once before, facing down rivals and overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. If Margaret thought she could take it all away, she was about to learn a painful lesson. Gabriel Montenegro had not come this far, had not sacrificed so much to be brought down by betrayal. As the lights of Chicago began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, he made a silent vow. He would uncover every detail of Margaret and Hunter's plan. He would let them think they were winning, let them believe they had outsmarted him, and then, when the moment was right, he would bring their world crashing down around them. The game was no longer just about money or business. This was personal, and Gabriel intended to make sure that those who had betrayed him paid the ultimate price. As night fell over Chicago, the city hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its midst. In 3 different locations, 3 individuals set plans in motion that would change their lives forever. In the Montenegro penthouse, Margaret sat at her vanity, methodically removing her makeup as she steeled herself for the role she would have to play in the coming weeks. She caught sight of the massive diamond on her left hand, a symbol of the life she was preparing to leave behind. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really ready to give up everything for a man she had known for only 6 months? But then she remembered the thrill of Hunter's touch, the promise of a life filled with passion and adventure. She thought of the years she had spent playing the perfect wife, always in Gabriel's shadow, never truly living for herself. No, there was no going back now. She had made her choice, and she would see it through to the end. Across town in his sleek apartment, Hunter pored over financial documents, his mind racing with possibilities. Margaret's inside information had opened up avenues he had never dreamed possible. With her help, he could siphon off millions, maybe even billions, without Gabriel ever suspecting a thing. It was the score of a lifetime, and Hunter was determined to make the most of it. But as he worked, a nagging doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain detached, to see his marks as nothing more than means to an end. But Margaret was different. Despite his best efforts, he found himself genuinely caring for her, wanting to give her the life she deserved. It was a dangerous sentiment in his line of work, one that could lead to costly mistakes. Hunter shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. There would be time for sentiment later, once they were safely away with their newfound wealth. For now, he needed to stay sharp, to anticipate every possible move Gabriel might make. And in his office at Montenegro Plaza, Gabriel sat in the darkness, illuminated only by the glow of his computer screen. The initial shock and pain of Margaret's betrayal had given way to a cold, focused rage. He had always known that the business world was cutthroat, that loyalty was a rare commodity, but he had never imagined that the greatest threat to his empire would come from within his own home. As he reviewed the evidence Sarah had gathered, a plan began to take shape in Gabriel's mind. It was risky, potentially devastating if it went wrong. But if it succeeded, it would not only save his fortune but teach Margaret and Hunter a lesson they would never forget. Gabriel reached for his phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Reardon here. Jack, it's Gabriel Montenegro. I need your services. It's a delicate matter requiring the utmost discretion." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Reardon spoke again, his voice was all business. "I'm listening, Mr. Montenegro." As Gabriel outlined his plan, he felt a grim satisfaction settling over him. Margaret and Hunter thought they were playing a game, but they were about to learn that they were hopelessly outmatched. In the world Gabriel inhabited, there were no second chances, no room for mercy. They had made their choice, and now they would face the consequences. The stage was set, the players in position. In the coming weeks, a battle would be waged in the shadows of Chicago's glittering skyline, a battle of wits, of will, and of ruthless determination. And when the dust settled, only one side would be left standing. As Gabriel hung up the phone, he allowed himself a small, cold smile. Let Margaret and Hunter enjoy their little victory for now. Soon enough, they would learn the true cost of crossing Gabriel Montenegro. The clock on his desk ticked steadily, counting down the moments until the real game began. In the world of high finance and even higher stakes, time was the most precious commodity of all, and Gabriel intended to make every second count. The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gabriel Montenegro's office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. Gabriel sat motionless, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the computer screen before him. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the muted sounds of Chicago awakening far below were the only noises breaking the tense silence. For hours, he had been poring over financial reports, bank statements, and transaction logs. What he found made his blood run cold. The discrepancies were no longer just suspicious, they were damning. Millions of dollars, siphoned off through a complex web of transfers and hidden accounts. At first, he had suspected corporate espionage, perhaps a mole within his organization. But as he dug deeper, a far more painful truth began to emerge. Gabriel's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the path of the missing funds. Each discovery was like a knife to his heart. Luxury purchases in Paris, private jet rentals to exotic locations, massive cash withdrawals from accounts he didn't even know existed, and at the center of it all, a name that appeared again and again. Margaret Montenegro. "It can't be," Gabriel muttered, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. But the evidence was irrefutable. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for over 2 decades, was systematically draining their accounts. A soft knock at the door jolted Gabriel from his reverie. Sarah, his loyal assistant, entered with a concerned look on her face. "Mr. Montenegro, you've been here all night. Is everything all right?" Gabriel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. It's sensitive." Sarah nodded, her professionalism masking her growing worry. "Of course, sir. Anything. I need you to hire a private investigator, the best in Chicago. Tell them I want every move Margaret makes documented. Every person she meets, every place she goes. And Sarah," Gabriel's voice dropped to a whisper, "this stays between us. No one can know." As Sarah left to carry out his instructions, Gabriel turned back to his computer. His mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, why? They had built this life together, shared dreams and ambitions. What could have driven Margaret to betray him so completely? Over the next few weeks, Gabriel lived a double life. To the outside world, he was still the confident, successful businessman, negotiating deals and growing his empire. But behind closed doors, he was a man consumed by suspicion and hurt, poring over surveillance photos and investigator reports. The final blow came on a crisp autumn evening. Gabriel sat in a nondescript car across the street from the Four Seasons Hotel, his heart pounding as he watched the entrance. At precisely 8:15 p.m., a sleek black Audi pulled up. Margaret stepped out, looking stunning in a red cocktail dress. But she wasn't alone. A man Gabriel didn't recognize emerged from the driver's side. Tall, dark-haired, and considerably younger than Gabriel, he placed his hand on the small of Margaret's back as they entered the hotel. The casual intimacy of the gesture told Gabriel everything he needed to know. For a long moment, Gabriel sat motionless, the reality of Margaret's betrayal washing over him. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Jack, it's Gabriel Montenegro. I need everything you can find on the man with my wife. Name, background, financials, everything." As he hung up, a wave of nausea hit him. Gabriel barely made it out of the car before retching onto the sidewalk. Passers-by gave him a wide berth, no one recognizing the billionaire in the disheveled man bent double on the street. When he finally straightened up, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief, Gabriel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: utter, crushing defeat. The woman he loved, the partner he had trusted with everything, had not only betrayed him emotionally, but was actively working to dismantle the empire they had built together. The next few days passed in a blur of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Gabriel threw himself into his work with a fervor that alarmed his employees. He was the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave, often working through the night. It was as if by sheer force of will he could make the betrayal disappear, could return to the life he had known before. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It started with a persistent cough that Gabriel dismissed as stress or perhaps a mild cold. But when he began experiencing chest pains and shortness of breath, Sarah insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt on an already stormy sea. Stage 4 lung cancer metastasized to his liver. The prognosis was grim. 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. As Gabriel sat in the sterile hospital room, listening to the oncologist outline treatment options, he felt a strange sense of calm descend over him. The pain of Margaret's betrayal, the fear of losing everything he had built, even the shock of his diagnosis, all of it seemed to recede, replaced by a singular, burning purpose. He would not go gentle into that good night. If these were to be his final months, he would make them count. Margaret and her lover thought they had won, that they could simply take everything he had worked for. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That night, alone in his office, Gabriel began to plan. He called in favors from old friends and made deals with former enemies. He restructured his company, created new shell corporations, and moved assets with a speed and precision that left his financial team scrambling to keep up. To the outside world, it appeared that Gabriel Montenegro was simply consolidating his empire, perhaps preparing for a major acquisition. But in reality, he was setting the stage for a revenge so complete, so devastating, that it would be talked about in Chicago business circles for years to come. As the weeks passed, Gabriel allowed Margaret to believe that her deception was still undetected. He played the role of the distracted, workaholic husband perfectly, even as he watched her every move. He learned everything there was to know about Hunter Davis, the man who had stolen his wife's heart and conspired to steal his fortune. Hunter, Gabriel discovered, was a professional con man with a string of wealthy victims in his wake. Margaret was just the latest in a long line of women he had seduced and swindled. This knowledge brought Gabriel no comfort, but it did strengthen his resolve. He would not only protect what was his, but he would make sure that Hunter Davis never conned another person again. As for Margaret, Gabriel's feelings were more complex. The love he had felt for her for so many years warred with his anger and sense of betrayal. In the end, he decided that she too must face the consequences of her actions. She had made her choice, had thrown away a life of loyalty and trust for the empty promises of a con man. Now she would learn the true cost of that decision. Gabriel's plan was intricate, a masterpiece of financial and legal maneuvering. He created a web of transactions and investments so complex that even his top financial advisors couldn't fully unravel it. At the center of it all was a single irrevocable trust, its contents and beneficiaries known only to Gabriel and his most trusted lawyer. As he worked, Gabriel felt his strength ebbing. The cancer treatments left him weak and nauseous, his once imposing frame becoming gaunt and frail. But he pushed through the pain and fatigue, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. He had always been a man who valued control, and now, faced with the ultimate loss of control over his own life, he channeled all of his considerable will into this final act. It was on a cold, rainy night in late November that everything changed. Gabriel had just finished a grueling round of chemotherapy and was working late in his office, as had become his habit. Sarah had long since gone home, leaving him alone in the vast, empty building. As he stood to pour himself a glass of water, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Gabriel reached out to steady himself on the desk, but his weakened legs gave way. He crumpled to the floor, his head striking the corner of the desk as he fell. For a moment, everything went black. When Gabriel came to, he found himself lying in a pool of his own blood, unable to move. The pain in his head was excruciating, and he could feel a warm wetness spreading beneath him. With trembling hands, he reached for his phone, but it had skittered across the floor in his fall, just out of reach. As he lay there, the reality of his situation sinking in, Gabriel was struck by a moment of perfect clarity. He saw with sudden, stark vividness the path his life had taken, the choices that had led him to this moment. He thought of Margaret, of the love they had shared and lost. He thought of Hunter, the man who had taken everything from him, and he thought of his plan, the intricate web of revenge he had woven. In that moment, Gabriel Montenegro made a decision that would alter the course of everything that was to come. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself across the floor to his desk. Pulling himself up just enough to reach the keyboard, he typed out a series of commands, entering passwords and overriding security protocols. As his vision began to blur and his consciousness faded, Gabriel hit the final enter key. On the screen, a message flashed, "Protocol initiated." With a faint smile on his lips, Gabriel Montenegro closed his eyes, knowing that even in death he would have the last laugh. The game had changed, and now no one, not Margaret, not Hunter, not even Gabriel himself, could predict the outcome. As the first light of dawn broke over Chicago's skyline, Sarah arrived at the office to find Gabriel unconscious and barely breathing. The ambulance was called, and within hours, the news had spread throughout the city's business community. Gabriel Montenegro, titan of industry and one of Chicago's most influential figures, had suffered a massive stroke. In the days that followed, as Gabriel lay in a coma in the ICU, the wheels he had set in motion began to turn. Across the city, in boardrooms and back alleys, on trading floors and in luxury penthouses, the ripples of his final act began to spread. Margaret, rushing to the hospital with a convincing display of wifely concern, had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. And Hunter, confident in his victory, was blind to the net that was slowly closing around him. As machines beeped steadily, keeping Gabriel's failing body alive, his mind, always his most powerful weapon, had launched its final, most devastating attack. The stage was set for a denouement that would shake the very foundations of Chicago's elite society. In his hospital room, surrounded by the cold efficiency of medical technology, Gabriel Montenegro lay still, his face serene. To all outward appearances, he was a man defeated by illness and betrayal. But beneath the surface, in the labyrinthine world of high finance and legal maneuvering, his last and greatest plan was just beginning to unfold. The coming weeks would see fortunes made and lost, reputations destroyed, and lives forever altered. And at the center of it all, silent and seemingly helpless, lay the man who had orchestrated it all, Gabriel Montenegro, master strategist to the very end. As news of Gabriel's condition spread, the city held its breath, waiting to see what would become of the Montenegro empire. But the true drama was yet to unfold, hidden in the shadows of boardrooms and bedrooms, in secret accounts and whispered conversations. The game had entered its final, most dangerous phase, and as the players took their positions, unaware of the true stakes, the clock ticked inexorably towards a conclusion that none of them could have foreseen. In the quiet of his hospital room, monitored by machines and attended by nurses, Gabriel Montenegro waited. His body might be broken, but his will remained indomitable. He had set the board, moved the pieces, and now, even from the brink of death, he would see his final game played out to its bitter, inevitable end. The stage was set, the players unaware of their roles in this grand, tragic play. As Chicago went about its business, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its midst, the first domino in Gabriel's intricate plan began to fall. The endgame had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the private hospital room where Gabriel Montenegro lay motionless, his once powerful frame now frail and diminished. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell created an atmosphere of sterility that seemed at odds with the turmoil raging within the comatose man's mind. Dr. Emily Chen, Gabriel's lead physician, stood at the foot of his bed, reviewing his latest test results with a furrowed brow. She turned to Sarah, who had barely left Gabriel's side since his admission. His vitals are stable, but there's been no significant improvement in brain activity, Dr. Chen explained softly. At this point, we have to consider the possibility that he may never regain consciousness. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving Gabriel's face. He's a fighter, Dr. Chen. If anyone can beat this, it's him. As the doctor left, Sarah leaned in close to Gabriel's ear. I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Montenegro, but I'm carrying out your instructions. Everything is proceeding as you planned. In the depths of his coma, Gabriel's mind whirled with memories and plans. The betrayal of Margaret, the diagnosis of his terminal illness, and the intricate revenge he had set in motion before his collapse, all of it swirled together in a chaotic maelstrom of thought and emotion. In his mind's eye, Gabriel saw himself standing at the pinnacle of his empire, surveying all he had built. But the image shifted, crumbling away to reveal the harsh reality of his current state, trapped in a failing body, fighting against time itself to see his final plan through to completion. Across town, in the lavish Montenegro penthouse, Margaret paced nervously, her phone pressed to her ear. Hunter, we need to move faster. Gabriel's condition has opened up opportunities we didn't expect. We need to act now, before anyone gets suspicious. Hunter's smooth voice came through the line, a note of caution in his tone. Patience, baby. We can't afford to make any mistakes. One wrong move and we could lose everything. Margaret's frustration was palpable. We're talking about billions of dollars, Hunter. With Gabriel out of the picture, we could have it all. Don't you see? This is our chance. As she hung up, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the demure, supportive wife she had played for so many years. There was a hardness in her eyes now, a determination that bordered on desperation. She thought back to the day she had first met Hunter, how he had awakened something in her that she thought had died long ago. The thrill of their secret meetings, the rush of adrenaline as they plotted to take Gabriel's fortune, it had all been intoxicating. But now, with Gabriel lying comatose and their plans so close to fruition, Margaret felt a new emotion taking hold: impatience. In his sleek downtown apartment, Hunter Davis sat at his computer, a glass of expensive scotch at his elbow. His handsome face was illuminated by the glow of the screen as he pored over financial documents and bank statements. To an outsider, Hunter appeared to be the picture of success, young, wealthy, and charismatic. But beneath the polished exterior lay a man driven by an insatiable hunger for more. More money, more power, more conquests. Margaret Montenegro had been his greatest challenge yet, and his greatest prize. Not only was she beautiful and sophisticated, but she held the key to a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. Hunter had played his role to perfection, becoming her confidant, her lover, her partner in crime. But as he reviewed the complex web of accounts and transfers they had set up, a flicker of unease passed through him. Something didn't add up. The Montenegro fortune was vast, but certain key assets seemed to be missing. Hunter's mind raced. Had Gabriel suspected something? Had he hidden away parts of his wealth where even Margaret couldn't access it? Or was there something else at play, some angle that Hunter hadn't considered? He reached for his phone, then hesitated. Margaret was becoming increasingly erratic, her desire for immediate gratification threatening to derail their carefully laid plans. No, he would keep his suspicions to himself for now. After all, in his line of work, information was power. And Hunter Davis never gave up an advantage. Back at the hospital, Sarah sat by Gabriel's bedside, speaking in hushed tones to Jack Reardon, the private investigator Gabriel had hired before his collapse. "Mr. Montenegro's instructions were clear," Sarah explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're to proceed as if he were still actively managing the company. All major decisions are to be run through the protocols he established." Reardon nodded, his weathered face creased with concern. "And what about the other matter? The surveillance on Mrs. Montenegro and her companion?" Sarah's expression hardened. "We continue as planned. Mr. Montenegro wanted every detail documented. He was very specific about that." As they spoke, neither noticed the slight flutter of Gabriel's eyelids, the almost imperceptible twitch of his fingers. Deep in the recesses of his mind, Gabriel fought against the darkness that threatened to engulf him. He had come too far, sacrificed too much to let go now. In his mind, Gabriel saw the elaborate chess game he had set in motion. Each piece was carefully positioned, waiting for the right moment to strike. Margaret and Hunter thought they were the players, but in reality, they were merely pawns in a game whose true scope they couldn't begin to comprehend. Days turned into weeks, and the Montenegro Empire continued to function smoothly, guided by the protocols Gabriel had put in place. To the outside world, it appeared that the company was weathering its CEO's absence remarkably well. Stock prices remained stable, major projects proceeded on schedule, and there was no hint of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Margaret, growing bolder with each passing day, began to take a more active role in the company's affairs. She attended board meetings, made public appearances, and even gave interviews to the press, painting herself as the devoted wife stepping up in her husband's time of need. But behind closed doors, her actions told a different story. Late-night meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, hushed phone calls with Hunter, and a growing pile of documents detailing the Montenegro assets, all pointed to a woman preparing to seize control. What Margaret didn't realize was that her every move was being carefully monitored and documented. The loyal employees Gabriel had placed in key positions throughout the company kept Sarah informed of every decision, every inquiry, every attempt to access restricted information. Hunter, meanwhile, found himself grappling with an unfamiliar emotion: doubt. The more he dug into the Montenegro finances, the more convinced he became that something was amiss. Certain accounts didn't add up. Investments seemed to lead to dead ends, and large sums of money appeared to have vanished into thin air. One night, unable to shake his growing unease, Hunter decided to confront Margaret. He arrived at the penthouse unannounced, a file of documents tucked under his arm. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, as Margaret opened the door. "Something's not right with the numbers. I think Gabriel might have outsmarted us." Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't be ridiculous. Gabriel's in a coma. He's no threat to us now." But as Hunter laid out his concerns, showing her the discrepancies he'd uncovered, a seed of doubt began to take root in Margaret's mind as well. Had she underestimated her husband? Was it possible that even now, trapped in a hospital bed, Gabriel Montenegro was still 10 steps ahead of them? As they argued late into the night, neither Margaret nor Hunter noticed the small, sophisticated listening device hidden in a vase of flowers, a silent witness to their growing panic and recriminations. Miles away, in a nondescript office building, Jack Reardon listened to the conversation with grim satisfaction. He picked up his secure phone and dialed Sarah's number. "It's happening," he said simply. "They're starting to unravel." Sarah's voice was steady when she replied, "Good. Proceed to the next phase. Mr. Montenegro was very clear about what needs to happen now." As she hung up, Sarah looked at the silent figure in the hospital bed. "It's working, sir," she whispered. "Everything is falling into place, just as you planned." In the depths of his coma, Gabriel Montenegro felt a surge of triumph. The pieces were moving, the trap was closing. Soon, very soon, Margaret and Hunter would learn the true cost of their betrayal. But even as his plan progressed, Gabriel found himself locked in a different battle, a fight for his very survival. The cancer that had been eating away at his body before the stroke continued its relentless advance. Dr. Chen and her team worked tirelessly, trying experimental treatments and aggressive therapies, but the prognosis remained grim. In his mind, Gabriel raced against time, reviewing every detail of his plan, searching for any weakness, any oversight that could derail his revenge. He had sacrificed everything for this, his health, his happiness, perhaps even his life. Failure was not an option. As weeks turned into months, the tension in Chicago's business community reached a fever pitch. Rumors swirled about the true state of Gabriel Montenegro's health, about power struggles within the company, about the possibility of a hostile takeover. Margaret found herself besieged on all sides. Board members questioned her authority, longtime allies suddenly became distant, and reporters dogged her every step, hungry for any hint of scandal. The pressure began to take its toll, and cracks started to appear in her carefully cultivated image. One particularly stressful day, after a contentious board meeting, Margaret retreated to her office, her hands shaking as she poured herself a generous glass of wine. She was about to take a sip when her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, a picture of her and Gabriel on their wedding day, both of them young and smiling, full of hope for the future. For a moment, Margaret felt a pang of something. Regret? Guilt? But she quickly pushed it aside. She had come too far to second-guess herself now. Gabriel had taken her for granted, had put his ambition and his empire ahead of their marriage. She deserved this, deserved the life she was fighting for. But as she stared at the photo, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if Gabriel woke up? What if against all odds he recovered and returned to reclaim his empire? The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, as the full implications of that possibility hit her. Across town, Hunter was facing his own crisis of confidence. His usual smooth charm had deserted him, replaced by a gnawing paranoia. Every sideways glance, every whispered conversation he wasn't privy to, seemed like a potential threat. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to stay one step ahead of the game. But now, he felt like a man stumbling in the dark, unsure of his next move. The Montenegro fortune, which had seemed within his grasp just months ago, now felt like a mirage, constantly receding as he reached for it. In a moment of weakness, Hunter considered cutting his losses and running. He had squirreled away enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from Chicago and the web of lies he had woven. But the thought of giving up, of letting Margaret and all that money slip through his fingers, was too much to bear. No, he had come too far to back out now. He would see this through to the end, whatever the cost. As Margaret and Hunter grappled with their growing fears and doubts, Gabriel Montenegro's plan continued to unfold with clockwork precision. Key assets were quietly moved, loyal employees were positioned in crucial roles, and damning evidence was gathered and stored away, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed. Sarah, working tirelessly behind the scenes, orchestrated it all with a level of skill that would have made Gabriel proud. She was his most trusted lieutenant, the one person who knew the full scope of his plan, and she was determined to see it through, to honor the faith he had placed in her. But even Sarah couldn't have predicted the next twist in the tale. On a cold, rainy night in February, as she sat by Gabriel's bedside reading him the latest company reports, something extraordinary happened. Gabriel's eyes, which had been closed for so long, suddenly fluttered open. His lips moved, forming words that were barely audible. Sarah leaned in close, her heart pounding. "Sarah," Gabriel whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Is it done?" Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she grasped his hand. "Not yet, Mr. Montenegro, but soon. Everything is proceeding exactly as you planned." A faint smile touched Gabriel's lips, and then his eyes closed once more. But this time, it was different. The machines monitoring his brain activity came to life, showing patterns that had been absent for months. Dr. Chen, summoned to the room, could hardly believe what she was seeing. "It's remarkable," she said, reviewing the data. "Mr. Montenegro appears to be emerging from his coma. I can't explain it, but he's fighting his way back." As news of Gabriel's improvement spread, it sent shockwaves through the Montenegro empire. Board members who had been wavering in their support suddenly rallied. Employees who had been quietly looking for other jobs recommitted themselves to the company. And in penthouse suites and exclusive clubs across Chicago, the city's elite began to recalculate their allegiances. For Margaret and Hunter, the news was nothing short of catastrophic. All their careful planning, all their schemes and manipulations suddenly seemed to be on the verge of unraveling. They met in a secluded hotel room, both of them pale and agitated. "We need to move now," Margaret insisted, pacing the room like a caged animal. "If Gabriel wakes up, if he talks to the board or the lawyers, we're finished." Hunter, sprawled in an armchair, ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "It's too risky. We don't have access to all the accounts yet. If we make our move now, we could end up with nothing." Their argument raged for hours, each of them becoming more desperate and more accusatory as the night wore on. By the time they parted ways in the early hours of the morning, their once united front had fractured, replaced by mutual suspicion and barely concealed hostility. What neither of them knew was that their entire conversation had been recorded, every word and gesture captured by the sophisticated surveillance equipment Jack Reardon had installed in the room weeks earlier. As dawn broke over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city's iconic skyline, the stage was set for the final act of Gabriel Montenegro's grand plan. In his hospital room, attended by Dr. Chen and a team of specialists, Gabriel continued his slow but steady journey back to consciousness. Sarah, exhausted but exhilarated, made a series of phone calls, setting in motion the last pieces of the intricate puzzle Gabriel had designed. Board members were summoned for an emergency meeting. Lawyers were put on standby, and in a secure vault deep beneath the Montenegro building, a set of documents that had lain dormant for months were finally retrieved. To the outside world, it appeared that a miracle was unfolding, the triumphant return of a beloved business leader, defying the odds to reclaim his rightful place at the head of his empire. Headlines proclaimed the Montenegro miracle, and news crews camped outside the hospital, hungry for any update on Gabriel's condition. But beneath the surface, a very different story was about to unfold. The trap that Gabriel had so painstakingly laid was about to be sprung, and the unsuspecting prey, Margaret and Hunter, had no idea how completely they had been outmaneuvered. As the city held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next, Gabriel Montenegro lay in his hospital bed, his eyes closed but his mind razor-sharp. Everything he had endured, the betrayal, the illness, the long months of darkness, had led to this moment. And as he felt strength slowly returning to his body, he allowed himself a small secret smile. The game was almost over, and Gabriel Montenegro intended to emerge as the undisputed victor. Margaret and Hunter had played their parts to perfection, never realizing that they were merely actors in a drama of Gabriel's creation. Now, as the curtain prepared to rise on the final act, they would learn the true cost of underestimating Gabriel Montenegro. In the coming days, Chicago would witness a reckoning unlike anything it had seen before. Fortunes would be made and lost, reputations shattered, and lives forever altered. And at the center of it all would be Gabriel Montenegro, the maestro orchestrating a symphony of revenge from his hospital bed. The city slept, unaware of the seismic shifts about to rock its foundations. But in boardrooms and bedrooms, in law offices and luxury penthouses, the key players in this high-stakes drama prepared for a confrontation that would leave no one unscathed. The endgame had begun, and as the first light of a new day dawned over Chicago, the winds of change began to blow. The Montenegro Empire stood on the brink of its greatest challenge yet, and the world watched, waiting to see who would emerge victorious from the looming storm. The somber tolling of church bells echoed across Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, their mournful song carried on the crisp autumn breeze. A sea of black-clad figures moved slowly up the steps of Holy Name Cathedral, their faces etched with grief, shock, and in some cases carefully concealed calculation. Gabriel Montenegro, titan of industry and one of Chicago's most influential figures, was dead. The news had sent shockwaves through the city's business community. After months of lying comatose, Gabriel had shown signs of recovery, sparking hope and speculation, but in a cruel twist of fate, just as it seemed he might reclaim his empire, his weakened body had finally succumbed to the ravages of cancer. Inside the cathedral, beneath soaring Gothic arches and stained glass windows, Chicago's elite gathered to pay their respects. In the front pew, Margaret Montenegro sat rigid, her face hidden behind a black veil. To all appearances, she was the picture of a grieving widow, but beneath the veil her eyes darted nervously around the crowded church, searching for one face in particular. Hunter Davis slipped into the cathedral just as the service was beginning, taking a seat near the back. His handsome face was composed in an expression of appropriate solemnity, but his eyes never left Margaret's veiled figure. As the priest delivered the eulogy, praising Gabriel's business acumen and philanthropic works, a palpable tension began to build in the air. This was more than a funeral. It was the end of an era, and everyone present knew that the real drama was yet to unfold. The reading of Gabriel Montenegro's will, scheduled for the following day, loomed large in everyone's minds. Billions of dollars hung in the balance, and the future of one of Chicago's most powerful business empires would be decided. As the funeral procession made its way to the cemetery, whispered conversations and furtive glances were exchanged. Alliances were being formed and broken with every passing moment, as Chicago's power players jockeyed for position in the post-Montenegro landscape. Margaret remained isolated throughout, playing the role of the grieving widow to perfection. But as the first shovelful of earth hit Gabriel's casket, she felt a momentary pang of something: regret, guilt, or merely apprehension about what was to come. She pushed the feeling aside. There was no room for sentiment now. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, would be decided in the next 24 hours. She couldn't afford to waver. As the mourners dispersed, Margaret found herself face to face with Sarah, Gabriel's ever-loyal assistant. For a moment, the two women regarded each other in silence, years of unspoken tension hanging between them. "Mrs. Montenegro," Sarah said, her voice cool and professional, "the reading of the will is scheduled for 2 p.m. tomorrow at the Montenegro building. Mr. Goldstein asked me to confirm your attendance." Margaret nodded stiffly. "I'll be there, of course. Thank you, Sarah." As Sarah turned to leave, Margaret called out, unable to help herself, "Sarah, how was he at the end?" Sarah paused, her back to Margaret. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He was at peace, Mrs. Montenegro. He said he had accomplished everything he set out to do." With that cryptic statement hanging in the air, Sarah walked away, leaving Margaret with a growing sense of unease. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Across Chicago, in luxurious penthouses and wood-paneled boardrooms, strategies were planned and discarded. Lawyers pored over documents, searching for any loophole or advantage. And in a small nondescript office, Jack Reardon, the private investigator Gabriel had hired months ago, prepared to deliver the final piece of a puzzle years in the making. As the appointed hour approached, the conference room on the top floor of the Montenegro building began to fill. Board members, executives, and key shareholders took their seats around the massive oak table, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret arrived last, escorted by her personal attorney. She took her seat at the head of the table, her face a mask of composure. But those who knew her well could see the slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes that betrayed her anxiety. Jerome Goldstein, Gabriel's longtime lawyer and the executor of his estate, called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice grave, "we are here today to read the last will and testament of Gabriel Montenegro. Before we begin, I must inform you that Mr. Montenegro made some unusual requests regarding this proceeding." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Margaret leaned forward, her heart pounding. Goldstein continued, "At Mr. Montenegro's instruction, this reading will be conducted in 2 parts. First, we will address the distribution of his personal assets and the future of the Montenegro Corporation. Then, there will be a brief recess, after which, well, Mr. Montenegro left a video message that he requested be played for all of you." The murmur grew louder. A video message? It was unprecedented, but then again, Gabriel Montenegro had always had a flair for the dramatic. Goldstein cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Gabriel Montenegro, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my assets as follows." What followed was a masterclass in legal and financial maneuvering. Gabriel had restructured his entire empire in his final months, creating a labyrinth of trusts, foundations, and holding companies. The Montenegro Corporation would be divided, with significant portions going to long-time employees and charitable foundations. As Goldstein read on, Margaret's composure began to crack. Where was her name? Where was the control of the company she had been promised? Finally, Goldstein reached the portion of the will addressing Gabriel's personal assets. "To my wife, Margaret Montenegro, I leave the sum of $1 million to be paid in monthly installments over the next 10 years. The room fell silent. $1 million. It was a fortune to most, but to Margaret, who had grown accustomed to a life of unimaginable luxury, it was a pittance. And the monthly installments, it was as if Gabriel was reaching out from beyond the grave to control her, to remind her of her dependence on him. Margaret's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake. She opened her mouth to protest, but Goldstein was already moving on. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a brief recess. Please return in 15 minutes for the viewing of Mr. Montenegro's video message. As the room emptied, Margaret remained in her seat, stunned. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently about challenges and appeals, but his words washed over her unheard. She was so lost in her shock that she didn't notice Hunter enter the room until he was standing right in front of her. "Maggie," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. Now." She looked up at him, seeing the panic in his eyes. Without a word, she stood and followed him to a small private office adjacent to the conference room. As soon as the door closed behind them, Hunter rounded on her. "What the hell happened in there? Where's the money? Where's the control of the company?" Margaret shook her head, still dazed. "I don't know. I don't understand. This isn't what we planned. This isn't what Gabriel and I agreed to years ago." Hunter ran his hands through his hair, his cool facade crumbling. "You said you had it all under control. You said Gabriel would never suspect. Damn it, Maggie. I've burned through everything I had setting up our exit strategy. If we don't get that money..." His words trailed off as the implication hung in the air between them. Margaret stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. The charm, the promises of adventure and passion, all of it stripped away to reveal the truth. Hunter Davis was nothing more than a con man, and she had fallen for his biggest con. Before she could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah's voice came through, cool and professional. "Mrs. Montenegro, Mr. Davis. The video presentation is about to begin." They returned to the conference room, taking seats as far apart as possible. The lights dimmed, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. For a moment, there was only static, and then Gabriel Montenegro's face filled the screen. He looked gaunt, the effects of his illness clear, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "If you're watching this," Gabriel began, his voice strong despite his frail appearance, "then I am gone. But don't mourn for me. What you're about to witness is the culmination of my life's work, my final and greatest achievement." He paused, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I'm sure by now you're all wondering about the will that was just read. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary. You see, the real distribution of my assets, the true future of the Montenegro Empire is about to be revealed." Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. A glimmer of hope sparked within her. Had Gabriel been playing some sort of game? Was her inheritance, her rightful place at the head of the company, about to be announced? But as Gabriel continued speaking, that hope was quickly extinguished. "For the past year, I have been aware of a plot against me, a conspiracy to steal my fortune, to dismantle everything I've built. The architects of this plan thought they were clever, thought they had deceived me, but they underestimated me, as so many have done before." Gabriel's eyes seemed to bore directly into the camera, and by extension into the souls of everyone watching. "Margaret, my dear wife, did you really think I wouldn't notice the missing funds, the secret accounts? Did you think your affair with Mr. Davis would go undetected?" Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Around the room, shocked gasps and murmurs erupted. She wanted to run, to hide, but she was frozen in place, unable to look away from Gabriel's accusing gaze. "And you, Hunter Davis," Gabriel continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "you're not the first con man to try to infiltrate my world, and I doubt you'll be the last, but you are perhaps the most ambitious and the most foolish." Hunter, his face ashen, gripped the arms of his chair so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "What you're about to see," Gabriel said, "is the result of months of careful planning and investigation. Mr. Goldstein, if you would be so kind as to distribute the files." Jerome Goldstein stood, producing a stack of thick manila envelopes. He moved around the room, placing one in front of each person present. "In these files," Gabriel explained, "you will find irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy against me. Bank records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, everything needed to prove the guilt of those involved." As the room erupted into a flurry of activity, with people tearing open the envelopes and poring over their contents, Gabriel's voice cut through the chaos. "But this is not just about punishment. This is about justice, about protecting what I've built. And so I have made arrangements to ensure that the Montenegro Empire not only survives this betrayal, but emerges stronger than ever." He outlined a complex restructuring of the company, one that would distribute power among a carefully selected group of long-time employees and trusted advisors. The Montenegro Foundation, a philanthropic organization Gabriel had established years ago, would become the majority shareholder. Its mission expanded to include oversight of the corporation's ethical practices. And as for the personal fortune that Margaret and her accomplice so desperately sought, Gabriel said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice, it will be used to establish a fund for victims of financial fraud. It seems a fitting use, don't you think? As the full scope of Gabriel's revenge plan became clear, Margaret felt her world crumbling around her. Everything she had plotted and schemed for, every betrayal and lie, had been for nothing. Worse than nothing. She was ruined, her reputation destroyed, her future bleak. She turned to look at Hunter, seeking some small comfort or support, only to find his chair empty. In the chaos following Gabriel's revelations, he had slipped away, abandoning her to face the consequences alone. Gabriel's voice drew her attention back to the screen. "Margaret," he said, his tone softer now, almost sad. "I loved you once. I thought we shared a dream, a vision for the future. I gave you everything, my trust, my love, my life, and in return you gave me betrayal." Tears streamed down Margaret's face as the weight of her actions, the enormity of what she had lost, crashed down upon her. "But I am not without mercy," Gabriel continued. "The $1 million mentioned in the will, that provision stands. It's not the fortune you sought, but it's enough to start a new life, a chance at redemption if you choose to take it." As Gabriel's image faded from the screen, the room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted questions, lawyers huddled in corners whispering furiously, and security guards appeared at the doors, presumably to prevent anyone from leaving until the authorities arrived. In the midst of it all, Margaret sat motionless, Gabriel's final words echoing in her mind, a chance at redemption. But how could she possibly redeem herself after all she had done? As the reality of her situation sank in, Margaret realized that the game she had thought she was playing, the clever manipulation of a distracted husband, the exciting affair with a younger man, the promise of unimaginable wealth, had been nothing more than an illusion. The real game, orchestrated by Gabriel from his hospital bed, had been playing out on a level she couldn't even comprehend. In his final act, Gabriel Montenegro had not only protected his legacy and punished those who betrayed him, but he had also reshaped the very nature of his empire. The Montenegro Corporation would now be a model of ethical business practices, its vast resources directed towards making a positive impact on the world. And Margaret, she was left with nothing but the hollow realization that she had sacrificed true love and a life of purpose for a fantasy that had crumbled to dust in her hands. As the authorities arrived, and the process of untangling Gabriel's intricate web of revelations began, a stunned hush fell over the room. In boardrooms and newsrooms across Chicago, the story of Gabriel Montenegro's final masterstroke began to spread. It would become the stuff of legend, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and poetic justice that would be told and retold for years to come. And somewhere in the city, as the sun set on the day that had seen the fall of Margaret Montenegro and the rebirth of her husband's legacy, Hunter Davis boarded a plane, a small bag of hastily packed belongings his only companion. He had lost everything in his bid for wealth and power, but he had escaped with his freedom, for now. As night fell over Chicago, the lights of the Montenegro building shone as brightly as ever, a beacon of power and influence on the city's skyline. But within its walls a new era was dawning, one that would reshape not just a single corporation, but the very idea of what it meant to wield power responsibly in the modern world. Gabriel Montenegro was gone, but his presence lingered, his final act of brilliance ensuring that his name would be remembered, not just as a successful businessman, but as a visionary who had found a way to turn personal tragedy into a force for good in the world. And in a small empty apartment across town, Margaret Montenegro sat alone, the weight of her choices heavy upon her shoulders, facing a future she had never imagined and the long, difficult road to redemption that lay ahead. The Chicago Tribune's headline screamed across newsstands throughout the city, "Montenegro's last stand, betrayal, revenge, and redemption." In the days following the explosive will reading, the story of Gabriel Montenegro's final masterstroke dominated every conversation, from high-powered boardrooms to corner coffee shops. Margaret Montenegro, once the toast of Chicago's elite social circles, now found herself at the center of a media firestorm. Paparazzi camped outside her penthouse, hungry for a glimpse of the fallen socialite. Old friends suddenly became scarce, their calls and invitations drying up overnight. The same people who had fawned over her at charity galas and exclusive events now whispered behind her back, reveling in the schadenfreude of her downfall. As she sat in her lavish penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of a life that was quickly slipping away, Margaret felt the walls closing in. The hefty monthly payments from Gabriel's will wouldn't begin for another 30 days, and her access to the Montenegro fortune had been cut off entirely. For the first time in decades, she faced the prospect of financial uncertainty. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters seeking comment, lawyers offering their services, and a few brave souls she had once called friends, reaching out more out of morbid curiosity than genuine concern. She ignored them all, lost in a haze of disbelief and mounting panic. It was Sarah, of all people, who finally broke through Margaret's isolation. The assistant arrived at the penthouse unannounced, armed with a stack of papers and a determination that brooked no argument. "Mrs. Montenegro," Sarah said, her voice crisp and professional as always, "we need to discuss your immediate future. The board has requested that you vacate this property within the week. They've arranged for a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, paid for from your monthly stipend." Margaret stared at her, uncomprehending. "Vacate? But this is my home. Gabriel and I bought this penthouse together." Sarah's expression softened slightly, a flicker of pity crossing her face. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Montenegro. The penthouse was always owned by the corporation. You're welcome to take your personal belongings, of course, but everything else must remain." As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Margaret felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She stumbled to the bathroom, retching into the marble sink. When she emerged, pale and shaken, Sarah was still there, waiting patiently. "Why are you doing this?" Margaret asked, her voice hoarse. "Why help me at all after everything that's happened?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Because it's what Mr. Montenegro would have wanted. Despite everything, he believed in second chances. This is yours, Mrs. Montenegro. I suggest you take it." Over the next few days, Margaret went through the motions of packing up her life, feeling like a stranger in her own home. Each designer dress, each piece of expensive jewelry seemed to mock her, reminders of a life built on deception and greed. As she sorted through her belongings, Margaret came across a photo album she hadn't looked at in years. Inside were pictures from the early days of her relationship with Gabriel, candid shots of them laughing together, their eyes shining with love and shared dreams. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered the woman she had been then, full of hope and genuine affection for the brilliant, driven man who had swept her off her feet. When had it all changed? When had the thrill of building a life together been replaced by the hollow pursuit of more money, more status, more thrills? Margaret couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but she knew that somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. The day of the move arrived, grey and drizzly, matching Margaret's mood perfectly. A small moving truck waited outside, ready to transport the meager belongings she had decided to keep. As she took one last look around the penthouse, Margaret felt a strange mix of grief and relief. This place had been her gilded cage, and while the prospect of leaving was terrifying, a small part of her welcomed the chance to start anew. Her new apartment in Lincoln Park was a far cry from the luxury she was accustomed to. The rooms were small, the furniture basic, and the view was of a brick wall rather than the stunning cityscape she had grown used to. But as Margaret unpacked her few boxes, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility. That feeling was short-lived, however, as the reality of her new life quickly set in. The first time Margaret went grocery shopping, she stood in the aisle, overwhelmed by the task of budgeting and meal planning. She had never had to think about such mundane details before, always relying on personal chefs and household staff to take care of these things. Her first attempt at cooking dinner for herself ended in near disaster, with a smoke-filled kitchen and a charred mess that bore little resemblance to the gourmet meals she was used to. As she sat on the floor of her tiny kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her failure, Margaret broke down in tears. How had her life come to this? But as the days turned into weeks, Margaret slowly began to adapt. She learned to navigate public transportation, to comparison shop for the best deals, to find joy in small accomplishments like successfully doing her own laundry. It was a humbling experience, but with each small victory, she felt a growing sense of independence she had never known before. 1 month after the move, Margaret received her first stipend payment. The sum, which once would have seemed like pocket change to her, now represented a lifeline. She sat at her small dining table, carefully budgeting every dollar, realizing for the first time the value of money earned rather than simply acquired. As Margaret settled into her new routine, she couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led her to this point. The betrayal of Gabriel, the affair with Hunter, the greedy pursuit of wealth and status. It all seemed so hollow now, so pointless in the face of the simple contentment she was slowly discovering in her new life. She thought often of Hunter in those early days, wondering where he had disappeared to and if he ever spared a thought for her. But as time passed, she realized that what she had felt for him had never been love, but rather a desperate attempt to recapture the excitement and passion she thought she had lost. One day, about 3 months into her new life, Margaret was walking through Lincoln Park when she spotted a familiar face. It was David Chen, Gabriel's former CFO, sitting on a bench feeding the pigeons. For a moment she considered turning away, not ready to face anyone from her old life, but something made her pause. "David?" she said hesitantly, approaching the bench. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Mrs. Montenegro, I didn't expect to see you here." Margaret smiled wryly. "Please, call me Margaret. I think we're well past formalities at this point." David nodded, gesturing for her to sit. For a few minutes they sat in awkward silence, watching the pigeons squabble over breadcrumbs. Finally, David spoke. "I wanted to hate you, you know. When everything came out, when we all realized what you and that Davis fellow had been planning, I was angry. We all were. Gabriel was more than just a boss to many of us. He was a mentor, a friend." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry, David. More sorry than I can ever express." David turned to look at her, his expression softening slightly. "I can see that, and I think Gabriel saw it too in the end. That's why he gave you this chance." They talked for hours, David filling Margaret in on the changes at the company since Gabriel's death. The Montenegro Corporation was thriving under its new structure, its ethical business practices and philanthropic efforts earning praise from all quarters. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, David stood to leave. "You know, Margaret, there's a position opening up at the Montenegro Foundation. It's entry level, nothing glamorous, but, well, if you're interested, I could put in a word." Margaret stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. "Why would you do that for me after everything?" David shrugged. "Because I believe in second chances too. And because I think working to help others might be exactly what you need to find your way back." As he walked away, Margaret sat on the bench, her mind reeling. The prospect of returning to the Montenegro world, even in such a humble capacity, was both thrilling and terrifying. Could she do it? Did she even deserve the opportunity? Over the next few weeks, Margaret wrestled with the decision. She visited a local community center, volunteering her time to help with their fundraising efforts. To her surprise, she found the work deeply satisfying. For the first time in years, she felt like she was making a real difference, using her skills and connections for something greater than her own gain. It was during one of these volunteer sessions that Margaret had a chance encounter that would change everything. She was helping to serve meals at a homeless shelter when she noticed a man at the end of the line, his face hidden by a scraggly beard and a worn baseball cap. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, something in the way he moved. As he approached to receive his meal, their eyes met, and Margaret felt her heart stop. It was Hunter, the man she had once thought she loved, the partner in her ill-fated scheme, stood before her, a shell of his former self. His designer clothes had been replaced by threadbare jeans and a stained jacket. The charm and confidence that had once drawn her to him were gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate look. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Then, without a word, Hunter took his meal and shuffled away, disappearing into the crowd of hungry patrons. That night, Margaret lay awake in her small apartment, her mind churning with thoughts of Hunter, of Gabriel, of the life she had lost, and the new one she was struggling to build. She realized then that she had been given something precious, a chance to learn from her mistakes, to grow, to become someone better than she had been before. The next morning, Margaret called David Chen and accepted the position at the Montenegro Foundation. It would be hard, she knew, facing the people she had betrayed, earning back their trust, one small act at a time. But for the first time in a long time, Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a determination to make the most of the second chance she had been given. As she prepared for her first day at the foundation, Margaret took out the old photo album once more. Looking at the pictures of her younger self with Gabriel, she made a silent promise to honor his memory by becoming the person he had always believed she could be, to use this opportunity to make a real difference in the world. Little did Margaret know as she set out on this new path that Gabriel Montenegro had one last surprise in store, a final twist in the tale that would test her newfound resolve and force her to confront the true nature of redemption. Across town, in a nondescript office building, Sarah sat across from Jack Reardon, the private investigator who had been instrumental in uncovering Margaret and Hunter's plot. Between them on the desk lay a thick folder, its contents known only to them and the late Gabriel Montenegro. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked, his gruff voice tinged with concern. "It could undo everything we've accomplished." Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. "It's what Mr. Montenegro wanted. He believed that true redemption required more than just punishment or charity. It required a genuine change of heart." As they discussed the final phase of Gabriel's plan, the pieces of a puzzle years in the making began to fall into place. The game, it seemed, was not over yet. Gabriel Montenegro, even from beyond the grave, had one last lesson to impart. Not just to Margaret, but to all those who had been touched by his life and death. In the coming weeks, the city of Chicago would once again be rocked by revelations from the Montenegro Empire. But this time, the story would be one of hope, of the possibility of genuine change and of the power of forgiveness to transform lives. As the sun set on another day in the windy city, the stage was set for the final act of Gabriel Montenegro's grand design. And at the center of it all, unknowing but no longer unwilling, stood Margaret, a woman on the brink of either her greatest triumph or her final downfall. The choice, as Gabriel had always believed, would be hers to make. 6 months had passed since Margaret Montenegro had taken her position at the Montenegro Foundation. The crisp Chicago autumn had given way to a bitter winter, and now the first tentative signs of spring were beginning to appear in the city's parks and gardens. Margaret stood at the window of her small office, watching the world go by on the bustling street below. Her life now was a far cry from the opulent existence she had once known, but as she reflected on the past half year, she realized that she had found a contentment that had eluded her for decades. Her days were filled with purpose now. She threw herself into her work at the foundation, leveraging her social connections and event planning skills to organize fundraisers and awareness campaigns. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very talents she had once used to climb the social ladder were now being employed to help those less fortunate. It hadn't been an easy transition. Many of her former acquaintances still regarded her with suspicion or outright hostility. There were days when the weight of her past actions threatened to overwhelm her, when the ghost of Gabriel and the memory of her betrayal loomed large. But slowly, steadily, Margaret was rebuilding her life and her reputation. She had formed a close friendship with Sarah, of all people. The assistant's unwavering loyalty to Gabriel had initially been a source of tension, but over time they had developed a mutual respect that had blossomed into genuine affection. As she turned away from the window and settled back at her desk, Margaret's eyes fell on a framed photo. It was a group shot from the Foundation's most recent charity gala, her first major event since joining the organization. In it, she stood surrounded by her colleagues, her smile genuine, her eyes bright with a sense of accomplishment. Next to this photo was an older one, Margaret and Gabriel on their wedding day. She kept it there as a reminder, not of what she had lost, but of the person she was striving to become. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Sarah entered, a serious expression on her face. "Margaret," she said, her tone grave, "there's something you need to see." Sarah placed a thick manila envelope on the desk. Margaret recognized it immediately. It was identical to the ones that had been distributed at the reading of Gabriel's will all those months ago. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Gabriel's distinctive handwriting and a USB drive. "My dearest Margaret," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then you've taken the first steps on the path to redemption. I always believed that there was good in you, that the woman I fell in love with was still there, buried beneath years of resentment and misplaced ambition." Tears blurred Margaret's vision as she read on. Gabriel explained that everything, from the fake will reading to the carefully orchestrated downfall of her and Hunter, had been part of an elaborate plan, not just for revenge, but for redemption. "I knew that simply punishing you would solve nothing," Gabriel wrote. "You needed to remember who you were, to rediscover the passion for helping others that first drew me to you. And so I created this test. The foundation, the job offer, even your encounters with old acquaintances, all of it was carefully designed to give you a chance at a new life." Margaret's mind reeled. She looked up at Sarah, who nodded solemnly. "Keep reading," Sarah urged gently. The letter went on to explain that the USB drive contained evidence clearing Margaret of any legal wrongdoing. Gabriel had used his considerable influence and resources to ensure that she would not face criminal charges, regardless of the choice she made. "But the real decision is yours, Margaret," the letter concluded. "On this drive you'll also find documents transferring a significant portion of my personal fortune to you, enough to resume the life you once knew, if that's what you choose. Or you can continue on this new path, using those resources to expand the Foundation's work and truly make a difference in the world. The choice, my dear, is entirely yours, and that choice will be your final test and my last gift to you." As Margaret finished reading, she became aware that she was weeping openly. Sarah placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He never stopped loving you," Sarah said softly. "Even at the end, he believed in your capacity for change." For a long moment, Margaret sat in silence, the weight of Gabriel's final revelation settling over her. Then, with a deep breath, she stood and walked to the window once more. The city stretched out before her, a tapestry of lights and lives intertwined. She thought of the work she'd been doing, of the people she'd helped, of the sense of purpose she'd discovered, and she thought of her old life, the parties, the shopping, the endless pursuit of more. In that moment, Margaret Montenegro made her choice. She turned back to Sarah, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think," she said slowly, "that the Foundation could do a lot of good with those resources. Don't you?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she nodded. "I think Gabriel would be proud," she said. As the two women embraced, the last piece of Gabriel Montenegro's grand design fell into place. He had given Margaret the ultimate test, the chance to choose who she truly wanted to be. In the end, betrayal had led not to destruction, but to transformation. Margaret had lost a life of luxury and status, but she had gained something far more valuable, the opportunity to redeem herself, to become the person Gabriel had always believed she could be. As the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city Gabriel Montenegro had once dominated, his final legacy took shape. Not in the towering skyscrapers that bore his name, nor in the vast fortune he had accumulated, but in the changed heart of the woman he had loved. Margaret Montenegro stepped out of her office and into the fading light, ready to embrace her new life, a life of purpose, of redemption, and of the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The game was over, and in the end, love, not betrayal, had won. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.